Hello, Reddit. I don't even know where to start, but I guess introductions are in order. My name is James, I'm 34, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. My wife, Amanda, is 32. We've been married for 7 years, together for 10. She's stunning, confident, and, well, the center of every room she walks into. And me? I'm the guy quietly holding her purse in the corner, hoping she'll glance back and remember I exist. For years, I convinced myself I was lucky to have her. Out of my league, my friends would joke. I laughed along, pretending it didn't sting. Amanda had this way of making me feel both indispensable and completely invisible. She'd lean on me for everything, the bills, the groceries, even fixing the Wi-Fi, but when it came to our social life, I might as well have been a shadow. The first crack in the mirror came a month ago. Amanda had been acting off. She started staying late at work, which wasn't unusual for her high-powered marketing job. But the excuses felt rehearsed. Big campaign, she'd say, flashing her perfect smile. Or, you wouldn't understand, creative types like me don't clock out at 5. It wasn't just the late nights. She was on her phone constantly, giggling at texts and hiding the screen when I walked into the room. When I asked who she was texting, she'd roll her eyes. Just work stuff, James. Why are you so paranoid? Maybe I am paranoid, I thought. I've always been the sensitive one. Amanda loves reminding me of that. You're too soft, she'd say whenever I hesitated about something. Be a man, James. The words would slice through me, but I'd never let her see it. One Friday evening, she told me she had a girls' night. She dressed to the nines. Tight black dress, red lipstick, and heels I hadn't seen her wear in years. You're really going all out for margaritas with Becky and Sarah, I joked, trying to mask my unease. She shot me a look that made me feel 2 inches tall. It's called self-care, James. You should try it sometime. That night I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't right. Call it intuition or desperation, but I checked our shared phone bill. My stomach dropped. There were hundreds of texts and calls to a number I didn't recognize. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a client? A coworker? But deep down, I knew. The next morning, I confronted her. Amanda, who's this number? You've been calling and texting them nonstop. Her face barely flinched. She was always good at poker. That's Daniel from work. We're collaborating on a project. Don't be ridiculous. But I couldn't let it go. I started noticing more red flags. She'd leave the room to take calls. Her laughter was louder, more carefree when she thought I wasn't around. And then there was the scent. A cologne I didn't recognize lingering on her clothes. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Amanda had another work event. This time I decided to follow her. I felt pathetic, like a character in one of those awful drama movies. But I had to know. I tailed her car to a fancy downtown restaurant. She wasn't meeting coworkers. She was meeting him. I sat in my car, watching through the rain-streaked windshield as they laughed, touched hands, and shared a bottle of wine. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I wanted to burst into the restaurant, make a scene, demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, drowning in my own humiliation. When Amanda came home that night, she smelled like wine and lies. How was the event? I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't even look at me. Exhausting, she sighed, slipping out of her heels. You wouldn't understand. And maybe I don't. Maybe I never will. But one thing is clear. The woman I married isn't the woman standing in front of me now. And I don't know how to come back from this. After that night, something inside me shifted. I felt trapped in this whirlwind of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I couldn't confront her right away. I didn't even know where to start. How do you look at someone you've loved for a decade and accuse them of tearing your world apart? For a few days, I played along, pretending everything was normal. It was torture. Every time she smiled at me, I questioned if it was real or just another lie. Every kiss felt hollow. I started noticing every little detail. The way she checked her reflection in the mirror more often, how she spent extra time getting ready for work, and that damn phone that was always glued to her hand. I knew I needed proof, something solid to confirm what my gut was screaming. I decided to dig deeper. One evening, While she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. I knew her passcode. She'd once said I could use it to change the playlist during a road trip, back when we still laughed together. The messages were right there. A thread with Daniel glowing star. My stomach turned as I scrolled. At first, it was subtle work talk mixed with light banter. But then the tone changed. Daniel, last night was amazing. I can still feel you on me. Amanda, you're bad. I can't stop thinking about it either. James was clueless, as usual. Faced with tears of joy, I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. My chest tightened, and I thought I might throw up. I kept scrolling, even though every word was like a dagger to the heart. There were photos too, her in lingerie I'd never seen before, lying on a hotel bed with that smirk she used to reserve for me. I wanted to scream, to smash her phone, to demand answers. But instead, I put it back exactly where I found it and walked out of the house. I drove aimlessly for hours, barely seeing the road through the tears. When I finally returned home, Amanda was in bed, scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway watching her, my heart breaking all over again. She glanced up and frowned. "Why are you standing there like a creep?" I couldn't respond. I just walked to the couch and lay down, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was out of the question. My mind replayed their messages on a loop. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Amanda bustling in the kitchen. She was humming, like everything was perfect. "You're up early," she said with a smile, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. "Big plans today?" I stared at her, wondering how she could act so normal after what I'd read. Did she even feel guilty? Did she think I was so spineless I'd never find out? "No plans," I mumbled, grabbing the coffee. I didn't have the strength to confront her. Not yet. That day I called my best friend, Mike. Mike's the kind of guy who tells it like it is, no sugarcoating. When I told him everything, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, "James, you can't just sit there and let this happen. You need to do something." "But what?" I snapped. "She's got me wrapped around her finger. If I confront her, she'll twist it around and make me feel like the bad guy. She always does." "Then stop letting her," Mike shot back. "You deserve better than this, man. Start thinking about yourself for once." That hit hard. I'd spent so many years trying to be the perfect husband, supportive, understanding, patient. And for what? To be treated like a backup plan while she had her fun with Daniel? That evening, I made a decision. If Amanda thought I was clueless, I'd show her just how wrong she was. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything, the late nights, the texts, the lies. I even downloaded a tracking app to keep tabs on her whereabouts. Felt dirty, but I didn't care. I needed to know the full truth. A few days later, I got my chance. Amanda said she had a work dinner downtown and wouldn't be back until late. I checked the app and saw her heading to the same hotel I'd followed her to before. This time, I wasn't going to sit in the car and cry. I parked a block away and walked to the lobby. My heart was pounding as I asked the receptionist, "Hi, my wife is staying here tonight. Can you remind me of the room number?" I forgot it. I flashed a sheepish smile, trying to seem casual. To my surprise, it worked. "Amanda Miller? Room 418, she said, barely glancing up. Room 418. My legs felt like jelly as I took the elevator up. When I reached the door, I heard laughter, hers and Amanda's. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I had no plan, no idea what I was going to do. But before I could knock, the door opened. Amanda stood there, her lipstick smudged, her hair a mess. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw me. Behind her, Daniel was sprawled on the bed, shirtless and grinning like he owned the place. "James?" Amanda's voice was a mix of surprise and annoyance. "What the hell are you doing here?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. All I could do was stand there, staring at the woman I thought I knew and the man she'd chosen over me. For a moment, time froze. Amanda stood in the doorway, her expression shifting between shock, annoyance, and faint amusement. Behind her, Daniel remained sprawled on the bed, smirking like he was watching some cheap soap opera. My chest tightened as I tried to process the scene before me, but my mind was blank. my body paralyzed. Well, Amanda's tone was sharp, breaking the silence. Are you just going to stand there gawking? Or do you have something to say? Something to say? I had a million things to say, but none of them made it past the lump in my throat. My mouth opened, then closed again. I must have looked pathetic, exactly the way she always made me feel. I know, I finally stammered. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for sounding so weak. I know about you and him. I saw the messages. I followed you here. Amanda, how could you do this to me? Her eyes narrowed, and for a split second, I thought I saw guilt flicker across her face. But then she folded her arms, tilting her head in that condescending way she always did when she wanted to put me in my place. Oh, grow up, James, she scoffed. You're acting like a child. What did you expect? That I'd stay satisfied with someone like you forever? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible, each one twisting the knife she'd already plunged into my back. I glanced past her at Daniel, who was now casually buttoning up his shirt, completely unbothered by the situation. You're unbelievable, I muttered, my fists clenched at my sides. I gave you everything, Amanda. I worked late nights to pay the bills. I supported your career. I put up with your constant criticism. And this is how you repay me? By sneaking around with some guy from work? Don't make this about you, she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. You've been a miserable, boring excuse for a husband for years. Daniel makes me feel alive. He actually appreciates me, unlike you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Miserable? Boring? Was that all she thought of me after 10 years together? My vision blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted to scream, to yell, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she was putting me through. But instead, all I managed was a weak, "You're heartless." Amanda. Call it what you want, she said, her tone icy. But I'm done pretending to be happy in this sham of a marriage. You've been holding me back, James. I deserve better. Daniel, who had been silent until now, finally decided to chime in. Look, man, he said, his voice annoyingly casual. I think it's time you leave. Amanda and I have plans tonight, and you're kind of ruining the vibe. The audacity of this guy. My hands itched to punch that smug grin off his face, but I knew that would only make me look even more pathetic. Instead, I turned back to Amanda. You don't even care, do you? I asked, my voice trembling. You don't care about what we've built, about the years I've spent trying to make you happy. None of it matters to you. Her expression softened, but only for a moment. James, she said, her tone almost pitying. You're a good guy, but you're just not enough for me. I'm sorry if that hurts, but it's the truth. The words hit me like a freight train. Not enough. I'd always feared I wasn't good enough for her, but hearing her say it out loud shattered what little self-esteem I had left. Without another word, I turned and walked away. My legs felt like lead as I made my way back to the elevator, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I sat there for what felt like hours, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. When I finally drove home, the house felt emptier than ever. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bed, so I curled up on the couch, replaying the confrontation over and over in my head. Every cruel word, every smug glance. It was like a broken record, tormenting me endlessly. The next morning, Amanda came home as if nothing had happened. She walked through the door, her hair still damp from a shower, and gave me a cursory glance. I'll be moving my things out next week, she said, her tone matter-of-fact. We'll figure out the paperwork for the divorce later. I stared at her, stunned by her callousness. That's it? I asked. You're just leaving? No apology, no explanation. I already explained, she said with a shrug. We've been over for a long time, James. You just didn't want to see it. And with that, she walked upstairs, leaving me sitting in the wreckage of our marriage. The week that followed felt like living in a ghost town. Amanda stayed in the house, but she was already distant, as if she'd mentally moved out long before her declaration. She spent most of her time in the bedroom, packing her things or talking on the phone with Daniel. She didn't even bother hiding it anymore. Her blatant disregard for my feelings made every moment unbearable. I tried to keep myself busy. I went to work, pretended everything was fine, but I knew people noticed something was off. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon. "James, is everything okay at home? You've seemed distracted lately." "Yeah," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just some personal stuff. I'll get through it." But would I? Every time I came home, I was met with Amanda's indifference. One evening, I walked into the living room to find her sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "I ordered takeout," she said without looking up. "You can grab some if you're hungry." Her casual tone, as if nothing had happened between us, ignited something inside me. "Do you even feel bad about this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "About throwing everything away like it meant nothing?" She finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "James, I told you, I've been unhappy for years. I'm sorry if this is hard for you, but I need to move on." "Unhappy?" I repeated, my voice rising. "And instead of talking to me, you decided to cheat? To humiliate me?" She sighed, as if I were an inconvenience. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way, okay? But what's done is done. There's no point in dragging this out." Her coldness was suffocating. I left the room, retreating to the garage, the one place in the house that still felt like mine. I sat there for hours, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects, wondering where I had gone wrong. Was I really the boring, unworthy husband she made me out to be? The next day, she began moving her things out. A moving truck pulled up, and two men started hauling boxes. Amanda barely said a word to me, treating the situation like a business transaction. "I'll send you my lawyer's contact info," she said as she handed me a piece of paper. I couldn't take it anymore. "Why, Amanda?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why couldn't you just tell me you were unhappy? Why did it have to be like this?" She hesitated, her hand on the doorframe. For a moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But then she shrugged. "Because it was easier this way." And with that, she was gone. The silence in the house was deafening. I sat in the empty living room, staring at the spot where her favorite chair used to be. The weight of her absence pressed down on me, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. But as the tears fell, a new feeling began to take root. It wasn't just sadness or heartbreak. It was anger. Anger at her for what she'd done, but more than that, anger at myself for letting her treat me this way for so long. Something had to change, and it would, starting now. The first few days after Amanda left were unbearable. The house felt like a tomb, each room echoing with memories I couldn't escape. Her perfume still lingered in the bedroom. Her favorite coffee mug sat untouched on the kitchen counter, and her voice haunted the silence. I was drowning in the aftermath of her betrayal, unsure how to move forward. I spent hours scrolling through old photos on my phone, vacations we'd taken, birthdays we'd celebrated, lazy Sunday mornings where we'd laughed over burnt pancakes. It all felt like a cruel joke now. Had any of it been real? Or was I just a placeholder? A safety net for her until someone better came along? The anger that had simmered beneath the surface started to boil over. I wasn't just angry at Amanda, I was furious with myself. For years, I had ignored the red flags, convinced myself that her criticisms and dismissive behavior were just part of who she was. I had bent over backward to make her happy, sacrificing my own needs and self-worth in the process. And for what? To be discarded like an old piece of furniture? I decided I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Every corner of it was tainted by her presence, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. I called Mike, my best friend, and told him everything, this time sparing no detail. "You've got to get out of there, man," Mike said firmly. "You need a fresh start. Staying in that house is only going to make things worse." He was right. The next day, I started looking for apartments. It felt surreal, walking through empty spaces and imagining a new life without Amanda. The landlords were friendly enough, but I could tell they saw right through me. I probably looked like a guy who'd been hit by a truck. Eventually, I found a small one-bedroom place on the edge of town. It wasn't much, a bit run down with creaky floors and outdated appliances, but it was mine. Moving in was both liberating and terrifying. For the first time in years, I was alone. No Amanda to criticize the way I folded the towels or the meals I cooked. No one to dismiss my thoughts or roll her eyes when I spoke. Just me. At first, the silence was overwhelming. I'd sit on the couch, staring at the walls, wondering what Amanda was doing. Was she happy with Daniel? Did she even think about me at all? The thought of her laughing with him, building a new life while I struggled to get out of bed, made my stomach churn. But then, something unexpected happened. I started to notice the little things I'd missed about being alone. The freedom to leave dishes in the sink, the ability to watch whatever I wanted on TV without judgment, the simple joy of waking up without feeling like I was walking on eggshells. Slowly but surely, I began to reclaim pieces of myself that I hadn't even realized I'd lost. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind busy. My boss noticed the change and started giving me more responsibilities. For the first time in years, I felt competent, valued, like I actually had something to offer. But healing wasn't a straight line. There were nights when the pain would hit me out of nowhere, leaving me gasping for air. I'd lie awake, replaying our last fight, the cruel words she'd thrown at me, and wonder if I could have done something, anything, to change the outcome. One night, I found myself scrolling through Amanda's social media. Her profile was still set to public, and curiosity got the better of me. She hadn't posted much since leaving, but there was one new photo, a picture of her and Daniel at a fancy restaurant, glasses of wine raised in a toast. Her caption read, "Here's to new beginnings." Clinking glasses, my hands shook as I stared at the screen. The audacity of her to flaunt her happiness so openly, as if she hadn't just destroyed my life. I wanted to comment, to call her out for what she'd done, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. She'd moved on, and it was time for me to do the same. I deleted her from my contacts, blocked her on every platform, and resolved to stop letting her control my thoughts. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile light in the darkness. I wasn't okay yet, but maybe, just maybe, I would be someday. As much as I tried to move on, Amanda's shadow loomed over me. Every time I thought I was making progress, something would pull me back. A song on the radio, a couple holding hands at the grocery store, even a passing whiff of her perfume in the air. It all sent me spiraling back into the pain. Mike tried to help in his own way. He'd drag me out for beers or invite me to join him at the gym, insisting that getting out of the house would do me good. And it did, to an extent. But no matter how many weights I lifted or jokes Mike cracked, the emptiness inside me refused to go away. One evening, Mike suggested something bold. "James, have you ever thought about therapy?" He asked carefully, as if the word itself might set me off. "Therapy?" I scoffed, taking a swig of my beer. "What's a therapist gonna do? Tell me I married a horrible person and that I'm better off without her? I already know that." Mike didn't laugh. "It's not about Amanda," he said. "It's about you. You've been through hell, man. You deserve to talk to someone who can help you figure out how to deal with it." I brushed him off at first, but his words stuck with me. Late that night, as I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the blank walls, I realized he was right. I wasn't handling this on my own. If anything, I was barely holding it together. So, the next day, I made the call. A week later, I found myself sitting in a small, warmly lit office, nervously picking at the hem of my shirt as the therapist introduced herself. Her name was Dr. Morgan, and she had a calm, soothing presence that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I could open up. First, it was hard. I didn't know where to start, and every time I tried to talk about Amanda, my throat tightened and my voice cracked. But Dr. Morgan was patient. She didn't push or judge. She just listened. Slowly, I began to unpack everything. The years of feeling inadequate, Amanda's constant criticism, the betrayal that had shattered me. "James," she said one session, after I'd finished recounting another painful memory, "it sounds like you've spent a lot of time blaming yourself for what happened. But let me ask you this. Do you think Amanda ever truly appreciated you for who you are?" Her question hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd spent so long trying to be the husband Amanda wanted. I'd never stopped to consider if she'd ever loved me for who I actually was. The realization was both liberating and devastating. Therapy became a lifeline. It didn't magically fix everything, but it gave me the tools to start healing. Dr. Morgan helped me see that Amanda's actions weren't a reflection of my worth. They were a reflection of her own selfishness and inability to appreciate what she had. But just as I started to feel like I was making progress, life threw me another curveball. One evening, as I was settling in with a book, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. "Hey James, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk. Can we meet?" It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. Amanda. My hands trembled as I stared at the message. What could she possibly want now? She'd already made her choice. Why was she reaching out? Part of me wanted to ignore her, to delete the message and move on. But another part, the part still clinging to the hope that she might regret what she'd done, couldn't resist. "What do you want?" I typed back, my fingers shaking. Her reply came almost instantly. "It's complicated. Please just meet me tomorrow at 6, the coffee shop on Main." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The next evening, I found myself sitting in a corner booth, my heart racing as I waited for her to arrive. When she finally walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked different. Her confidence, the smug arrogance that had always defined her, seemed diminished. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly, sliding into the seat across from me. I crossed my arms, my voice cold. "What do you want, Amanda?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if she were afraid someone might overhear. I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "For everything. For the way I treated you. For how things ended. I was wrong, James." Her words caught me off guard. For months, I dreamed of this moment, of her admitting she'd made a mistake. But now that it was happening, it felt hollow. "Why now?" I asked. "You didn't seem too sorry when you left with Daniel." She winced at his name. "Daniel? He wasn't who I thought he was," she admitted. "Things didn't work out. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realized I took you for granted. You didn't deserve what I did to you." Her voice cracked, and for the first time in years, I saw vulnerability in her eyes. But instead of feeling vindicated, I felt nothing. The anger, the heartbreak. It was all just numbness now. "I appreciate the apology," I said slowly, "but it doesn't change what happened. You made your choice, Amanda. Now I'm making mine." Her face fell, but I didn't stay to see her reaction. I stood up, tossed some money on the table for my coffee, and walked out. For the first time since she left, I felt free. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like shedding a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Amanda's apology, though unexpected, didn't spark the emotions I thought it would. There was no satisfaction, no triumph, just clarity. I had finally seen her for who she truly was, and for once, I didn't feel the need to chase answers or validation from her. The drive back to my apartment was quiet, the city lights blurring through the windshield. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who bent over backward to please her, who absorbed every cutting remark and brushed off every red flag. That man was gone now, replaced by someone still raw but stronger in ways I hadn't anticipated. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. For the first time in months, I wasn't haunted by her betrayal. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't over everything, not by a long shot, but I knew I was on the right path. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone of my healing. Dr. Morgan helped me navigate the complicated feelings that lingered, reminding me that it was okay to mourn what I'd lost while embracing the possibilities ahead. One of those possibilities came in the form of an email from my boss. "James, I wanted to let you know about a potential promotion opening up. You've been doing excellent work lately, and I think you'd be a great fit. Let's discuss at your earliest convenience." A promotion? I reread the email 3 times, stunned. I'd spent so many years doubting my abilities, constantly second-guessing myself because Amanda made me feel like I wasn't enough. But now, here was tangible proof that I could succeed on my own terms. The meeting with my boss went better than I could have imagined. By the end of the week, the promotion was mine, along with a nice pay raise that would finally give me some breathing room. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. But the universe wasn't done throwing curveballs my way. About a month after Amanda's apology, I ran into her unexpectedly. It was at the grocery store of all places. I was grabbing a carton of milk when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "James?" I turned to see her standing there, holding a basket of groceries. She looked different, tired, almost. Her makeup was minimal, and her usually impeccable outfit was replaced by jeans and a sweater. It was the first time I'd seen her look genuinely human. "Hi," I said curtly, not sure what else to say. She hesitated, then offered a weak smile. "How have you been?" "Good," I replied. "Really good, actually." Her smile faltered, and I could tell she hadn't expected that. "I'm glad," she said softly. "You deserve to be happy." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered everything she'd done. Everything I'd been through because of her choices. "Thanks," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I hope you're doing okay." She nodded, but her eyes told a different story. "Take care, James," she said before turning and walking away. I stood there for a moment watching her leave. There was no urge to chase after her, no lingering bitterness, just a quiet sense of finality. Amanda was part of my past, but she no longer had a hold on me. That evening, I celebrated my promotion with Mike. We raised our glasses, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I genuinely smiled. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again, and that was enough. The days that followed my encounter with Amanda at the grocery store felt like the closing of an old, painful chapter. For the first time in a long while, I felt like my life belonged to me again. The anger, the sadness, the endless questions. All of it was slowly fading, replaced by a cautious optimism for the future. My new role at work kept me busy, and I threw myself into it with a focus I didn't know I had. The challenges were tough, but they gave me purpose, something to strive for beyond the wreckage of my marriage. Colleagues who had once been distant began to take notice of me. "You're really stepping up, James," one of them said during a team meeting. It felt good to be recognized, not as Amanda's husband, but as me. Outside of work, I started reconnecting with people I'd pushed away during my marriage. Mike, of course, remained a steady presence, but others from my past began to resurface too. Old friends reached out after hearing about my divorce, and I realized how much I'd missed those connections. One weekend, Mike invited me to a small barbecue at his place. I almost said no. Social events still felt a bit daunting, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. "You need to get out there, James," he insisted. "And who knows? You might meet someone." The idea of dating again seemed impossible, almost laughable. I wasn't ready, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. But I went anyway, if only to get Mike off my back. The barbecue was small and casual, just a handful of people sitting around the fire pit, sharing stories and laughing. For the first time in ages, I felt relaxed. Then, toward the end of the evening, Mike introduced me to someone. "This is Claire," he said, gesturing to a woman about my age. She had kind eyes and a warm smile, and when she spoke, her voice was calm and genuine. We started talking, and to my surprise, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We didn't talk about heavy things, just books, music, and our favorite vacation spots. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like a broken man. I just felt normal. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I stayed in touch. It started with casual texts and a coffee here and there, but it quickly became clear that we enjoyed each other's company. She wasn't like Amanda. She didn't make me feel small or inadequate. Instead, she listened, laughed at my jokes, and encouraged me in ways I hadn't experienced in years. But as much as I liked her, I was cautious. Dr. Morgan had warned me about rushing into something new while I was still healing. "Take your time," she'd said. "Learn to love yourself first." And she was right. As much as I wanted to move forward, I knew I couldn't build something new without first fully letting go of the past. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, I looked around and realized how much had changed. The space that had once felt empty and cold was now filled with pieces of me. photos of friends, books I'd always meant to read, and little reminders of the man I was becoming. Amanda's betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. If anything, it had forced me to confront the parts of myself I'd ignored for too long. It had taught me to value my own happiness, to set boundaries, and to stop living for someone who didn't value me in return. As I closed my journal that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, not just for a future with Claire or anyone else for that matter, but for myself. For the man I was becoming, and for the life I was finally ready to build. Amanda was a chapter in my story, but she wasn't the whole book. And now it was time to turn the page.